Hey, this is just a quick note about our sponsor, Privado, the premier enterprise privacy platform, purpose-built to bridge the gap between privacy and engineering. Its privacy code scanning solution embeds privacy compliance and governance into the product development lifecycle and empowers privacy and security teams with unparalleled visibility of sensitive data flows and the insights to find and fix privacy vulnerabilities. You can leverage Privado's data flows, dynamic data mapping, privacy assessment automation, and real-time visibility of privacy issues. Enter the era of proactive privacy and transform privacy from business blocker to business enabler. To learn more, go to privado.ai.
I think that it's very important that as the world grows increasingly more connected, that the connection is isolated to what we give access to, not what we put online. And I think there's a big difference between what we actually agree to give people access to and what they actually access. And I give you a perfect example. If you look at the EULAs, the end user license agreements, no one ever reads those. They're so long and obfuscated, and companies do that on purpose so that you don't read them.
Hello, I am Deborah J. Farber. Welcome to the Shifting Privacy Left podcast, where we talk about embedding privacy by design and default into the engineering function to prevent privacy harms to humans and to prevent dystopia. Each week, we'll bring you unique discussions with global privacy technologists and innovators working at the bleeding edge of privacy research and emerging technologies, standards, business models, and ecosystems. Welcome, everyone, to Shifting Privacy Left. I'm your host and resident privacy guru, Deborah J. Farber. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my next guest, Kevin Killens, CEO of AHvos. AHvos specializes in AI solutions for data-heavy businesses. In a strategic partnership with Trinsic Technologies, AHvos offers exclusive cloud hosting for its private AI engines, allowing businesses to have their own dedicated AI engines powered by their own data. According to Kevin, what sets AHvos apart is its proprietary technology called Contextually Responsive Intelligence, or CRI. Unlike traditional AI models that rely on large language models, or LLMs, and heavy neural networks, AHvos's CRI technology can act upon a business's private data and produce results without storing that data. I'm really excited to kind of dive deeper on this technology and learn more from Kevin. So welcome, Kevin.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Deborah. It's great to be here and look forward to our session today.
Excellent. So obviously, to start, I think it would be really helpful for you to tell us a little bit about AHvos, what motivated you to found this AI-focused company, and a little bit about what your career trajectory looks like. I know you were in the Army or Navy, or you were in the military, right?
Navy.
Awesome. Yeah. Tell us a little bit.
I was in the Navy. And, this company is a very personal effect for both my partner and I, and we're dedicated to it for a variety of reasons, obviously. But we saw that there were a lot of companies out there that were, performing AI and coming up with various models. Two things that stuck out to us. One was that the change in AI was really not that significant since the mid-century, last century. The main advancements that were made were hardware and the amount of digital data that was available. So my partner and I said, okay, there's got to be a better way of doing this. So we started to look into it more deeply. And the main reason that we focused on it was that we both have family members that had medical issues. So we wanted to find solutions for medical issues. And that's the reason why we started working with the models that we have with our engines. And because those medical issues were so personal to us, one of the key elements is that the medical issues that we had family members experience were not very common medical issues. And we all know pharmaceuticals focus on the dollars. And so smaller issues were not things that they would place a lot of heavy emphasis on. So we decided that we would come up with a system that we could address both the large level medical issues, but also the smaller, more niche or more rare conditions. So that's what kind of prompted us to start it. As we started moving down the path, we found that there were a lot of commercial applications to what we do. And so we obviously started working on that path as well. But our ultimate goal is to be able to provide very inexpensive AI solutions for the medical industry. And it wasn't what I started out doing in my life. I started out in the military, pretty much about a year out of high school, and spent some interesting time in various parts of the world. And was actually someone who hunted submarines. So that was an interesting component. Flew in helicopters, hunted submarines, did a variety of other things, and, found myself in the middle of some times that I didn't expect, but, glad to have served. And while it wasn't technical as we look at it today, hunting submarines in the military required a lot of technical understanding. And so that kind of started me off on the technical path, even though I took my first programming class in 1980. So way before probably most of your listeners were born. But that being said, after that, I got out and I started going down the technical path, started everything from consulting to various small businesses that I've owned, worked in fintech for about 25 years. And since that time frame, my partner and I, about 7 years ago, started working on AHvos. And so it's very exciting for us to be able to bring this to the market and look forward to seeing where it's going to go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's super helpful. So I know the reason that you're on the show is that you took a particular privacy related approach. I would love to hear about some of the issues you saw around AI and privacy and what that architectural approach is that you took for AHvos. I know you have several products, so maybe if it's at a higher level philosophy or if you wanted to go into your approaches to each product, I'll leave it to you.
We did take a privacy approach, and it's very important to us. I'm a bit of a privacy hack myself because I don't believe that people have a right to our data, our online personage, if you will. I think that it's very important that as the world grows increasingly more connected, that the connection is isolated to what we give access to, not what we put online. And I think there's a big difference between what we actually agree to give people access to and what they actually access. And I give you a perfect example. If you look at the EULAs, the end user license agreements, no one ever reads those. They're so long and obfuscated, and companies do that on purpose so that you don't read them. And that's when they're able to adjust things. What we did at AHvos, we said, okay, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to establish our engines, our models, to where they don't take advantage of people's personal data, where a company can be assured that their data is not going to be shared with other companies, made a part of our larger AI model. So our engines are designed to be able to learn concepts from customer data. They're not designed to keep the customer data. So when a customer actually injects data into our engine, what they're doing is they're giving our engine the capability of, or the opportunity to learn from concepts. Now, once we ingest that data, it's gone. We don't put it anywhere. We don't keep it. And the reason for that is that's not our data. It's the company's data. It's the other company's data. And so I think when it comes to architecting models, that we need to understand that we would want our customers to have the same security, the same privacy that we have and that we want, right? It's just like the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right?
It's not extract all the monetary value out of humans as much as possible and track them all across the world. It's not that.
It's very much like the Matrix, right? They look at us instead of a battery, it's a data source, right? And so they try to extract every bit out of us that they can. So, and that's anytime they have that opportunity. I mean, I find it interesting that many of the tech moguls don't allow their children to get online.
Agreed.
But they have no problem doing that with our data. And so if you look, I mean, it's interesting that when you say something, that all of a sudden you have ads pop up in your social media, et cetera, to find out what you want or to promote something. Well, we don't do that. You own the engine that we create for you. That engine is there to serve our customer. And in doing so, what we do is we make sure that you have the ability to use it for what you want to use it for. No one else at our company can see any of the data. Once it's processed, it comes in, it gets processed. We can't do anything with it. But our engine is then educated to do what you want it to do in order to be able to provide you the answers you want.
Could you unpack that a little bit for us? I mean, it has to be still processing data, right? I mean, if you're ingesting it somehow, even though you're not storing it, it's still going to be subject to like data processing regulations like the GDPR, right?
Sure, but here's the important part about it. It comes in, it gets processed. You could take our engine, you could look through that engine ad nauseum. You will never find anything related to it. You can't reverse engineer it. You can't. We learn concepts. It's like if you were talking to me about algebra. There's data, but you can teach me concepts about algebra without having to have specific problems. And so
that makes a lot of sense. So you're generalizing almost to make the context?
So, for example, if I took and gave you a problem, two sets of parents where you have A and B in first and C and D in last, right? Part of algebra is called FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, right? And it's the way you multiply, you come up with your various different result sets. Well, I can tell somebody FOIL, but they don't know that the data is A, B, C, or D. But if they see A, B, C, or D, they know how to act on it. And so, therefore, our engine understands how to get the result sets, but it doesn't keep the data.
Do you create a ontology that kind of overlays this, or is it the AI itself? Actually, we're going to get into that because I'm going to ask you what is contextually responsive intelligence. So I guess I'm going to ask it prematurely. Since privacy is all about context, I definitely would love to unpack this technology that you've put in the market.
Sure, absolutely. We have CRI, and it is contextually responsive intelligence. And the reason why we have that is because, look, I know all the rage is to have LLMs and to have generative AI. It's interesting because generative AI can create a document, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the document's correct. I mean, we've all heard the stories of people who use one of the various different generative AI models, and they used it for a professional reason, and it wound up biting them. And so what we do is we say, what would you like to know? And then they tell us, and we say, okay, great. Send us the data that you have. And then we will extract from that data what you want to know based on how it's labeled, based on a wide variety of things. And so what's exciting about it is that we give you the answers you're looking for rather than just giving you an answer. And there are a lot of, especially generative AI, that will give you an answer. It may not be right, but it'll give you an answer. The great part about what we have is we can actually ingest the data. Data comes in. As it comes in, it does momentarily get placed in our file, in a file, but it is consumed as it is getting placed there. So it's milliseconds that it's actually sitting there.
I'll just point out to the audience that while it doesn't take a company who would be using your product out of being subject to the GDPR, if there's being used in the EU, it's still great because this is like security for privacy. You're reducing the attack surface. You're making it near impossible to gain access to that raw data. You're abstracting it out with this contextually responsive intelligence. So I just kind of wanted to make that distinction, that I wasn't trying to say it's bad that it captures the data for a little bit, just that because it is processing data, if there's personal data that's being processed, it's still going to be subject to the GDPR if it's in the EU, which again is not a problem in and of itself.
No, it's actually not. And we welcome that. And the reason why we welcome it is we think transparency is key. So as we bring in data, what we do is we learn the concepts that want to be done from that. So for example, let me give you an example. Let's say you send us medical data. Well, medical data is very, how do you put it? It's very recognizable to a large degree. When they start talking about using words like oncology, they start using words like symptoms, et cetera. There are large sets of words that are used for the medical community that you can identify that as medical data. So we can learn, okay, this is medical data without having to say, well, this patient had this condition. And so therefore, we know how to deal with that data without having to deal with the specific patient and what data was represented in that file or in that data transmission from them. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. It's almost a little bit like a data discovery platforms, how they try to find what is structured or unstructured data, across the environment and like find the personal data or find the medical data. But here you've got a flexible platform for, it sounds to me at least, for a variety of use cases, not just, and clearly not the purpose of only data discovery, but here specifically for AI rather than for a GRC style, find all the data, data governance purposes, right? Here, it sounds like you're doing it for, how can you find and make relevant that data in the moment for what the person's searching for?
No, absolutely. So, for example, you may have data where you're looking to identify a particular item. So, one of the things that we're having, we'll talk about this in a moment, is the ability to identify and correct inaccurate dataset labels. So, that's just a single use. Other things are, for example, you take a telephone answering service, right? We can actually take data from them saying, here are our phone calls. And then what we can do is we can actually take that information and then find out what they want to audit from, get examples of that. And then we can take and say, okay, we can then look at all of their phone calls and say, you should audit this one, you should audit this one. And then we can actually go through their entire list of their entire sets of phone calls and be able to tell them these don't meet your standards. And right now, that just isn't possible, especially in the time frame that we can do it in.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, loyal listeners. The Shifting Privacy Left podcast is seeking sponsors who want to help educate our growing community of privacy engineers. Position your brand in front of privacy engineers, architects, developers, researchers, and privacy tech buyers. Insert a 30 to 60 second ad like this one into every published episode of the podcast. This is dynamic content after all. Feature your new product, an upcoming conference, a sponsored special deal, endless opportunities. Email sponsorship@shiftingprivacyleft.com for more information on our sponsorship package. Okay, let's get back to our engaging privacy conversation. Fascinating. Okay, well, let's turn our attention to a little bit around AI model bias. Typically, I stay on topic to privacy as much as I can, but because there's so much going on in the AI space with the overlap, and because you have such an interesting solution that deals with it, I'd love to talk a little bit about bias. And in your opinion, what's the leading cause or causes of AI model bias?
One of the things that we address in our CRI is we only use the customer data. We don't have engines that have been trained on data either scraped from the internet or large Gutenberg project only type data. There's wide varieties of models out there that train their engines or train their models based on publicly available data, scraping the web. And as a result, it goes into their model. And that is the base that then people use for if they want to fine tune that model, if they want to obtain answers, especially in the generative world where the generative AI, what they do is they actually take large amounts of data to be able to create a language response. But then whenever you ask for something or you try to fine tune that, what happens is it actually dilutes whatever your data is with the data that is already in the model. And so when it comes to model bias, I mean, we've all heard about the various different models out there that have a trillion parameters. Well, those parameters are actually set by machine, by algorithm, but those algorithms, those machines are adjusted by humans. So it can be biased based on what those parameters are. So when you look at human created algorithms to set the parameters, then you can actually influence a generative AI or any AI by adjusting how those parameters are set. In addition to that, you can actually by putting in tremendous amounts of data prior to the customer using it, it can actually cause that model to be biased based on the data that you put in. So if, for example, you have two different types of a cancer treatment, and one, the generative AI or the AI model is completely trained or primarily trained on type A treatment versus type B, then that model will be biased toward what it's been trained on. So there's more to training AI and educating our engines than what people understand. You will only get a composite of what's been put in. And so
garbage in, garbage out, as we hear. Yeah.
Right. Garbage in, garbage out. And then the other component to that is that where's the oversight? Who is watching how these models are set up? Who is monitoring whether or not they're being intentionally biased? We all know that there are ethics teams that have been laid off right after, enormous rounds of investments were made into various different generative AI platforms. Whenever you see someone disband a ethics team or an oversight team, the first question needs to be why. And those are a variety of reasons, and there can be legitimate reasons to do that as long as you replace it with another model to ensure that you're not providing biased answers. So one of the things that I think is important is, like I say, is transparency, to let people know what you're doing. We don't use data other than the data that the customer provides.
And this is stored and controlled, I should say, by your customer, right? Like the company or is this a managed service that AHvos would manage for them?
The data we receive comes directly from the customer.
My point is, are you managing it on their behalf and helping with the models, or is it controllable by them with them owning the access controls and all that?
It is. We actually have our engines in a space on Trinsic. And so it is, those environments are controlled by us. What gets injected into those engines is controlled entirely by the customer, because they have the data and they have access to an API, which then injects that data into our engine. And so it's not like we have their data setting somewhere where they, then they tell us what to inject. What they do is they send us that data, we put that in, and it only uses their data. Now, we work with customers. We have a business-to-business model that we have right now. Ultimately, we will go to the consumer with a alternative to our current LLM generative AIs, but it too will not share their data. So it's very important that people understand that. And then the customer can inject that information in. It gets digested. We don't keep the data. So now they have this engine that's in there that they can actually use to get the answers that they want. But they don't have to worry about, well, what about my competitor? Can they access my model? No, they can't. So it gives you the confidence that your data is secure. It's your own data. Your privacy is maintained for you.
And that data is not going to go to train models elsewhere.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not. Each engine's its own entity. Now, we can have our engines work together, But if they do work together, they only work together with the customer's other engines if they choose to have additional engines. So we do not allow for customer engines to work with outside engines.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for that. So I know a lot of people online, when I'm reading about AI, which is a lot of it is through online reading, people are usually talking about removing bias from AI training data sets. But what I've learned from you is that there's also a need to remove that bias in AI testing data sets. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, why is that the case? What could go wrong if you don't debias the testing data sets?
Sure. No, absolutely. Any data set, whether it be a training data set or a testing data set, needs to be as accurate as possible. And here's the key about AI. AI takes enormous amounts of data. Now, the great part about it is we only need about 25% of the data that other models need. We're able to reach our point where we can be accurate at about a quarter of the way to what they need. A good example is we actually took the Amazon, what they call the MARC, or the multi-language Amazon response corpus, and I maybe was quoting that, but the MARC, and then what we do is we take that data set, it's about 80,000 reviews from Amazon, and we take that data set, and then what we do is we actually inject that into our engine, very much like they did. Well, they take with an already trained model, and then they took this trained model, which could have taken anywhere from months to years to train. They inject the fine-tuning data in, about 80,000 records, and then they run the test sets in. Those test sets, to do the test sets and the fine-tuning, take them about 10 hours. We take our same engine from scratch. We take our engine, does not have any prior training. We run the fine-tuning on it, which we only take about 20,000 records versus the 80,000. And then in addition to that, we then run the test through. We do that all in seconds versus 10 hours, which is a huge opportunity when you look at needing fast responses. But the key to getting accuracy is having accurate data. So we actually detected in that particular data set that there are some inaccurate labeling for records. And so what we did was we're able to take and identify where that inaccuracy is at. And then we can also, should we choose to, be able to correct those sets. So the great part about it is if you put test sets in that are inaccurate and their model doesn't understand what those test sets should be, they're still going to give an answer, but it could be very much an inaccurate answer. So it's critical that your test sets have as much accuracy as possible so that you need to know what the actual answer is. So is this auditable or is it not? Well, if I put inaccurate data in my test set, I may come up with saying it's auditable when it shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. And what that does is that then uses resources from that company to actually do auditing that they don't need to do. Or on the converse, no, this shouldn't be audited, and therefore they skip over it. And now they have someone who is doing something incorrectly in their staff who does the calls, specifically addressing the telephone answering service. And that affects the results for the customers that they have. So testing data sets it's very important to have, the more accurate the data sets, the more accurate the education or the training. And we can help customers out there who have large data sets that people use for either training or testing. And there are companies who sell those. And we can help them correct some of the inaccuracies they have in those sets so that we can all have a better product out there. We're not here to replace anybody. What we're here to do is to help the overall industry to become better. That's our tagline: better AI, making AI better.
I like that. That's actually something you got to put that on a shirt because it's a good line. Tell us a little bit about the product that AHvos has, Data Crucible, which is your solution for identifying and correcting inaccurate dataset labels.
Sure. Data Crucible has the ability to, when you give us a data set, for example, you'll say, okay, here's all the data and here's the label we want on something like, for example, is this a large, medium, or small? And inevitably, whenever we receive data sets, there's going to be some that are, you can just visually see and that they're wrong. There's going to be some that are accurate, obviously, the more the better. And then there'll be some that are blank because either it wasn't labeled or it got skipped over, or maybe there was a flaw in the process, whatever the case may be. What our system can do is it can go evaluate the set of data and say, well, this should be a large, and it says small. This should be a large, and it's left blank. This could be a small, and it's done large. And then what we can do is we can do one of a couple of things. We can automatically correct those or label those for a company. Or what we can do is we can actually take that data set and say, here are the ones that we discovered have inaccuracies. What would you like us to do with them? And give the customer the opportunity to correct their data if they choose to. Or they say, well, that's such a small percentage, we're not worried about it. In all reality, I would think that wouldn't be the case. So we give the customer the opportunity to act on their data. Once again, privacy, right? We're not going to automatically act on someone's data unless they give us the go ahead to do so. It's important that people respect other people's data. If I gave you $100,000 and I said, hey, I want you to hold on to this for me, but you went out and you shared that with a bunch of people on the streets, I think that people could understand that that would be a gross misplacement of trust on my part. Well, it's even worse with data, because data is something that can be used not only to affect people's lives, but affect people's decision making that affect others' lives. And so if we're going to train, if we're going to test data on behalf of the public or behalf of other companies, then we need to do the best we can do in order to be able to provide them what they should feel is well-placed trust by giving them opportunities to act on their data in the way they choose to, and also showing them anything that they may believe is accurate when it's not, or vice versa.
Thank you so much for that. That's a great explanation. What advice do you have for our audience of privacy engineers as they tackle AI challenges in their own organizations? I define privacy engineers as those who work on privacy as researchers, as designers, architects, developers, data scientists. So a broad technology focus. But if there's any of those groups that you'd want to call out, or just generally, what advice would you have?
Well, my first statement would be everyone is a privacy engineer. And that's from the customer who owns the data all the way down to the person who may be answering a support call, someone who may be actually addressing the data, a researcher, et cetera. If you're not a privacy engineer, then you're part of the problem, because in the way that AI works, everyone has the opportunity when they see something to say something. So you're a privacy engineer, speak up. So it's really important. One of the things that we have within our company, if anyone sees something, it is their responsibility to say something. And no one's going to get in trouble for saying something in our company. Now, I understand that more often than not, this is a contentious aspect. In the AI world today, everything is about speed. There was recently an announcement made about a new model by one of the major companies. And then it was found out that their model, their demo, was canned.
It was Google.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a race to market before you have a finished product. That's a race to market. And as a result, there's some scathing responses out there. We can't do that with people's data. The reason why we haven't come out with our alternative to LLMs, as so to speak, is because there are safeguards that we need to place around that.
And that should be in the MVP, right? Like that shouldn't be in the, well, we'll race to market and see what people think about it. And then, and then we'll add controls later.
It has to be in the MVP. It can't be. And to that point, that's a great point that you make, Deborah, related to your privacy engineers. What your discipline ensures is that when an MVP comes out, that it includes the privacy. So many times what you see is there is not privacy embedded in with developers in the DevOps routine. And if you don't embed privacy as a discipline there, it will not exist.
Because a lot of the times it's baked into the architecture. If you try to deal with it later, you might have to rebuild your entire architecture and tech stack. And it just...
You will. And that's what I was about to say. We all know about technical debt. Every company out there has technical debt. Technical debt is like the national debt. It never gets paid down. And the reason why is because that debt is almost insurmountable for companies. In a fast-paced world, going slow is going fast. If you go slow, make sure that privacy is within your AI model and architecture. You will go fast in the end because you will not retread. You will not have PR issues. You will not have lawsuits around your data privacy. That is absolutely critical. There are people out there right now there's lawsuits going through the courts around data scraping, around data leaks. And you are on the forefront. You're on the edge of the knife and that cutting edge that keeps companies accountable for what they do.
There must be so much pressure within not just privacy engineers, but engineers working on AI generally if they work for large companies that are feeling like they're in an arms race against one another with these different models that they're coming out with, especially generative AI, then it's really hard to, I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. Of course they should speak up, but it's really hard to tell everyone to slow down when the train has already left the building, So, but I do agree with you because, like Dr. Ruman Chowdhury says when she gives speeches on this topic, it's like when you add brakes to a car, like back when a car was being developed for the first time. And like by adding brakes, which are, slow you down literally by design, you actually drive faster because you have trust in the system that you're in. You have trust that they'll work when you need them. And therefore you trust yourself in going faster in that car. So I absolutely agree with you. I've been repeating this. This is not the first time I've mentioned that parable from Dr. Chowdhury on this show, at least. But I think it's just a perfect summation of what you just said, because even though you feel like you might be going slower, if you're adding privacy protections, security protections, you're thinking about the long term and other legal requirements, copyright, whatever else is out there. If you're not thinking about the holistically and building that into the MVP, then even though you might have a lot of traction up front, like OpenAI does, you might not be ahead in the long run because you won't be able to compete with companies that can sell products to enterprises that can assure certain things, like we're not going to be ingesting the wrong data, where it's going to be unbiased, it's going to, whatever got a threat model and then figure out how you're going to tackle that. But anyway, I'm pretty much saying 100% agree with you. That's great advice.
Well, I appreciate it because speed cannot offset privacy. You can't go into surgery saying, yep, we're just going to run through this. We're not going to think about contamination, sterility, et cetera. If you do, the patient's going to die. And that's what's going to happen with us if we do not understand that without putting privacy at the forefront of how we treat our customers will stop trusting us.
It's true. It's true. Especially in the enterprise space, or I should say the business space, right? Compared to consumers, because consumers can use a lot of these LLMs for, personal purposes, but, maybe they don't know it at the beginning, but eventually, they start to realize, oh, it's not always accurate, right? Like that could be a lesson learned across countries and people across countries that there's I won't call them hallucinations. There's lies. There's straight out lies that sometimes the responses will give back. But that's something that, can handle, I think, a little lower fidelity if it's going to help you with as a personal assistant of some sort. But if you've got a business that's making like decisions about people and other important things, you want to make sure that that's accurate, right? So what I hear, and I'm wondering if you're hearing the same thing, is that even though everyone and their brother has been deep diving into AI, trying different apps, using different models, and maybe in their own companies, maybe playing around and testing with some things, what I'm hearing is that very few large companies have actually deployed some of these generative AI models, at least.
Absolutely.
Because there's so much risk and they have to first define what that is and then figure out a way to address it. And then it might be like limiting by the nature of how the generative models ingest data in the first place.
It is true. And the key is that most of these corporations don't even really know how they want to use AI. And so one of the great things that we have with our partner Trinsic is we actually sit down and discuss with them what are the challenges they're running into and how can we solve them, once again, contextually with what they need. It does not clear us of what we need to do just by telling people don't use this for anything important, which is what the generative AI folks say. This is just beta, or this isn't to be used for anything that is critical. People are going to do that, and we have to make sure that we understand that we put out a product that could be used for something serious, and if it's not ready for that, then we need to make sure that we protect our customers by helping to put the security, definitely the privacy around things.
It makes a lot of sense to me. Well, Kevin, how can people reach out to you? What's the best way? And what's your website? Some contact information before we close today.
You can reach us at www.ahvos.com and also at trinsictechnologies.com, which is our partner. You'll be able to get to us. We look forward to any questions people may have, any opportunities that they feel like they see within their own marketplace where we can help them. And once again, it's important that people understand we do put privacy at the top of our priorities, because without it, the rest of it's just a house of cards.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today on the Shifting Privacy Left podcast. Until next Tuesday, everyone, when we'll be back with engaging content and another great guest. Thanks for joining us this week on Shifting Privacy Left. Make sure to visit our website, shiftingprivacyleft.com, where you can subscribe to updates so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found this episode valuable, go ahead and share it with a friend. And if you're an engineer who cares passionately about privacy, check out Privado, the developer-friendly privacy platform and sponsor of this show. To learn more, go to privado.ai. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode. Bye for now.